Okay. Let me see here. Okay, so yesterday we got into the conduction of the heart. Okay, we've been through the structures, we've been through the spaces, we've been through the valves. We've talked about why the ventricle walls are thicker than the atrial walls. We've talked about the semilunar valves. We've talked about the atrioventricular valves. We've talked about the inferior and superior and inferior vena cava. We've talked about all those different things, and we know that, right? And so yesterday we went into talking about how we have a coordinated system that allows for blood flow and how the heart is going to pump in a top to bottom type of direction. Okay? We have two different systems that are involved with this. We have the autonomic, which we've talked about through the nervous system, with autonomic being fight or flight, which is going to accelerate our heart rate, or our parasympathetic portion, which is going to slow things down when we're in chill out mode, right? So we've got that system that can regulate heart rate, okay? But then we also have this nodal system, and we talked about how the nodal system is a number of different points, where we talked about how we had a sinoatrial node, which is the natural pacemaker. It starts the contraction. The contraction spreads through the atria and it works its way down and through this atria, which causes squeezing up here, squeezing down here, squeezing, and it squeezes from the top to the bottom, kind of wrings itself out, and causes the blood to go into there. That signal will hit that AV node, which is right there. That AV node is going to take and perpetuate that signal. However, it is going to delay it by just a little bit. And when it delays it by just a little bit, that it allows for the atria to fully contract and shoot the rest of the blood into the ventricle. Then, after that slight delay, that signal will go, cause it to go down the bundle branches, the right and left bundle branches, into the Purkinje fibers and cause a contraction that will take that blood, squeeze, close those valves, and then out the semilunar valves it goes. Okay? So when we talk about these two systems, the autonomic and the nodal is what is just the natural pacemaking portion of the thing, of the of the heart. Okay? And so we can see how all of those things kind of fit together. And so, yes, we have valves that only allow for blood flow a certain way, but also we have this coordinated electrical event that allows this pump to pump directionally, allowing it to shoot blood where it needs to go. So we talked about how with this system being coordinated and it synchronizes heart activity, anything that goes wrong with that nodal system will cause a malfunctioning heart. Something goes wrong with the SA node, we aren't going to get depolarization of the atria. We're not going to be able to get the contraction. Something goes wrong with the atrioventricular valve, then that is going to be stimulated immediately, cause the ventricles to contract sooner, and not allow the ventricles to fully empty. If we have a Purkinje fibers that are messed up, then some of this wall is not going to contract, which means it's not going to go through the atria as the aorta at such pressure, and that's going to cause systemic, right, deficits, and we're not going to get the amount of blood flow into the systemic side. Remember, pulmonic side, all this side goes to the lungs. Systemic side, all of this side goes to the body. Okay, and then we did look at let's see, heart conduction system animation. Right, we talked about this here. When we looked at this,
Your face
you're
is your
probably going
moneymaker.
to
So
want
why
to
would you
keep
pair it?
this
from the SA node
um,
and passes that and
um,
determines heart.
familiar to you, because as we get further into here and we talk about this part, the QRS, the PQRS thing, whatever, you're going to want to, this will help show you how, what an EKG is doing. All right, so let's do this. So
The
as we look at
atriotes
this here
all
again,
heartbeat and determines heart rate.
we have a SA node, right? We have that depolarization waves that causes a contraction. Now that yellow is basically a contraction, an electrical event. Obviously it's going extremely slow. All right, so we're going to see it as it spreads through the atria. It's causing the blood to eject into the ventricles. All right, it has not yet hit the AV node. So these are going to continue, that depolarization wave is going to continue to spread in through the atria until it hits this AV node. That wave will still spread. However, there will be a delay for the signal. It'll hold that signal just a bit in order to allow full filling of the ventricles to then until that signal hits the bundle branches into the Purkinje fibers, causing a massive contraction, which is going to cause blood to shoot out the pulmonary trunk into the pulmonary veins and out the aorta. All right, do we see that? Okay, so then, like I said, we're going to get into this here probably pretty soon here. So this is basically, that is measuring all that electrical event. That's what that's doing. Okay, so let's go back to this. All right, so we did quickly talk about contraction and relaxation. We talked about systole is contracting and diastole is relaxing. Three. So this is really weird. I'd much rather be in class. Anyway, so contraction and relaxing, okay? Now, when we talk about the cardiac cycle, the events of one complete heartbeat, all right? So you have mid to late diastole, right? So we have mid to late relaxation, all right, to where the heart is completely relaxed. The AV valves are open and the SL valves are closed, okay? So we have this whole thing of where there's really not any contraction going. The atrias aren't contracting, the ventricles aren't contracting, so the AV valves are open and the semilunar valves are closed. All right? And that is mid to late relaxation. Okay? Then the blood flows from the atria into the ventricles. 70% of the filling occurs, and then the atria contracts. The rising blood pressure causes the AV valves to close. Whoa. Hold on, what happened? Oh yeah, rising blood pressure closes the AV valves. Okay. So what we're seeing here is everything's relaxed. Your AV valves are open. Your heart is relaxed. Blood's going to fall from the atria into the ventricles until 70% or so, and then these atria are going to contract. It's going to shoot more blood into the ventricles, which is going to increase the pressure, which is going to shut the valves. Okay? So then we have ventricular contraction. The AV valves are closed due to the rising blood pressure, right? The atria begin to start filling again because they've relaxed now. And then we have isovolumetric contraction phase. Okay, so now look, isovolumetric, right? Iso generally means something really doesn't move, right? And then we have this volume, right? So we don't have movement of blood, but we're having some contraction, all right? So what's basically saying here is this sucker, the ventricle, is just building pressure, right? Both valves closed while the ventricle contracts, right? So if we look at this, we have this has contracted, this has shot blood into here. The pressure, there's so much blood in here that it has closed these valves. And so what's happened is now we start to get the contraction here, and this thing starts to squeeze and builds pressure. Okay? And it builds pressure and it closes this one, and it's not enough pressure to blow through that yet. So we've built this isovolumetric pressure, okay, from this contraction. All right, so it builds pressure. Yes. So this isovolumetric contraction builds blood pressure, which forces the semilunar valves to open. Okay, so I should do this. I can use this. So if we're talking about building pressure here, they're building pressure until it's enough pressure to open those valves. That's what that's saying. Okay, so then we go into the ventricular ejection phase, right? So this basically says what's happening here. The ventricles are ejecting blood. Blood is expelled into the aorta or the pulmonary trunk, right? So what's happened is that isovolumetric contraction got strong enough to blow through or open up the pulmonic semilunar and the aortic semilunar valve. You see that? And so then they would call that, once the blood starts to move, they would call that the ventricular ejection phase. Okay? So then we have early diastole, so then we have early relaxation, right? We have isovolumetric relaxation. The ventricles start to relax. The pressure drops and backflow closes the semilunar valves, and the atrial pressures begin to force open the AV valves. Okay, so if we look at this, right? So once these start to relax, once we get to this point, right? So we see how, there we go, they've ejected, and then they're going to start to relax. And at this point, blood will want to fall back down the aorta pulmonary valve, but that is a one-way valve, and that valve will hold it closed. But by this time, this sucker is filling up. This thing's going to relax. These are going to open. That's going to start to spill in, and then we're going to start with our atrial contraction again. All right, so it doesn't seem like it's that difficult. What's amazing about it is how coordinated it is, right? I mean, you're talking about split seconds of time. You're talking about valves that hold things back. You're talking about the number of beats per minute. You talk about how many years you've been alive. All this, it is a very, for the most part, very reliable system. Okay? So we have these different, and so here's what we're talking about here. So this is kind of this whole chamber filling type thing, right? So we have this mid to late diastole, right? So we have, and remember, we're usually talking about ventricular type stuff, right? So mid to late ventricular relaxation. Okay? So this ventricle is relaxed, right? This ventricle is relaxed. We start to get the atria to contract. The atria push the blood into the ventricles, and then we have this whole ventricular systole, right? So we have two different phases to that. We have one where we start to build the pressure. We've got to build the pressure in order to get it to eject out of the semilunar. And then once we've built that pressure and blood starts to move, they call that the ventricular ejection phase. Okay? And then we get into this isovolumetric relaxation, right? So everything's going to relax again. Blood's going to kind of come back, but the valves are going to keep it from backspilling into the ventricles. These AV valves are going to start to open, and blood's going to start to trickle in. We talked about, remember, 70%. 70% is going to go in there, and then we're going to get this. We're going to start this over here again, where blood starts to go into there. This, see what we've got here? All right, so it's not terribly difficult, but if we need to, I might get that Zoom thing going and get you on there, and we can have a day or two where we talk things out and write things out or whatever. And then I get to use the mute function, so Smithers, he won't get to say much. Anyway, okay, so when we talk about the contraction times, we're talking about these are pretty quick. I mean, we know that electricity moves quickly anyway, but sometimes I don't think we realize how quick it is. So the cardiac cycle, right? So this cycle takes 0.8 seconds to do. Okay? Zoom would be a good idea. The only thing that I lose with not having Zoom is to be able to do this. I can do Zoom at home though. Anyway, blah blah blah. We can talk about that later. So this is 0.8 seconds. All right, 0.8 seconds is all that takes. So when you split it up, atrial systole is 0.1 seconds. So this thing right here is 0.1 seconds. Ventricular systole is 0.3, and the total heart relaxes for 0.4. So when we get into like this here, so this here and this here, that is 0.4. This is 0.1. This is 0.3. So quick. And so you can see that that AV node, that one that delays and doesn't allow for that signal to perpetuate or to go into the ventricle right away, that delays it just a tiny bit in order for the filling to occur. Okay? So this period, this 0.4 seconds, is the only time the heart gets to relax. So like I said, when we're talking about this part right here and this early portion here, right, where nothing's really contracting. That's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. What I want. This. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about these important points here, flow of blood is controlled by pressure changes. All right. When you think about it, when we have this here, like when we go to here, what we're doing here is when this contracts and that atria gets smaller, you take the same amount of fluid in a smaller amount of space. That means there's more pressure. That causes the blood to shoot into the ventricles, right? So as we squeeze it, come on, squeeze. As it squeezes, it's going to cause that pressure to increase. Then we're going to have this thing here is going to squeeze, cause the pressure to increase, which is going to be enough to blow through the valve at some point, and then the pressure is going to go that way. So the valves help make it one way. Plus, if you watch where the contractions start and how they spread, also allows for directional pumping. Now, that is intelligent design, right? It's not only the one-way valves, but we're also talking about the way the heart contracts as well, right? Anyway, blood flows along the pressure gradient through any available opening. Now, when I just talked about how the way, if this thing would start to depolarize here and contract here and work its way down, that would be completely inefficient because there's no way for the blood to escape down here. The only way for the blood to escape is up more superiorly here at the semilunar valves. So the way that this has been intelligently made and how we've been created, right, where we get a depolarization wave that starts low and works its way up, causing the contraction at the bottom up, which is going to take the blood and force it superior towards the semilunar valves. All right, it is amazing stuff. All right, so blood flows along the pressure gradient through any available opening, and so it contracts in a way so that it pushes the blood towards the available openings. Isn't that cool? I think that's cool. Anyway, an echocardiogram is a sonogram of the heart and is used to visualize the opening, closing of valves and working of the muscles. Okay, so we've heard of people getting echocardiograms, and what that does is that's looking at the valves being opened and shut. Let's just see something here. I probably have a better one of these. Now if we look here, okay, so let's orient ourselves. Left ventricle, right ventricle, aortic valve, left atrium. Okay, so this is completely opposite of how we normally look at this. All right? So let's orient ourselves, okay? So instead of this thing looking like this thing has turned clockwise about 90 degrees. See that? Here's our left atrium. Here's our left atrium. Here's our left ventricle. Here's our left ventricle. So we're kind of laying on our side now with our left side down. So we have our mitral valve, we have our right ventricle, we can see our aortic valve, okay? But you can watch as the heart pumps, you can see how these valves open and shut. Anyway, we'll get to more of that later, but I thought that was cool. Okay, so electrical events caused by conducting systems are recorded as deflection waves transmitted to the entire body by means of electrolytes. All right, so basically what we're going to talk about here is we can record these events through an ECG or an EKG, right? Electrocardiogram. All right, so these electrocardiograms have, it's the blippy thing. It's this, right? You go into the hospital, beep, 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 right? They do all that kind of stuff, right? So we wanted you to know what these waves mean, okay? So there's a P wave, there's a QRS complex, and there's a T wave, okay? There's a P wave, a QRS complex, and a T wave. All of these wave patterns have specific magnitudes and length of time patterns in a healthy heart. All right, so doctors, cardiologists that are really good, they can just look at those and tell that they're not right. All right, because when we go back to here, we know that we should have certain amount of time fractions that are in each event. And what we're going to see here, those things right there, are going to be represented by this complex here, right? So they have specific magnitudes and length of time patterns in a healthy heart. Any deviation from the norms may mean there's a heart defect within the conduction system. All right, so when you do an EKG, we're kind of looking for a electrical issue here. All right, so that's what we're talking about. So when we look at this, we see this P wave is atrial depolarization. All right, we see this is when we start to get the electrical contraction, right? We're basically measuring electrical activity. All right, and so we know that the atrias are small and the ventricles are big, right? And so when the atrias are small and there's not that much muscle, the amount of electricity to fire that thing is not going to be that high. And so what we're going to see is we're going to see that P wave is atrial depolarization, where the atria is going to fire, contract, and then relax. And then we're going to have a amount of time, and then we're going to get into this QRS complex, which is the ventricular depolarization and atrial repolarization. Anyway, but ventricular depolarization, right? To where what we're going to see here is there's a start, a spike of that full contraction, and then a relaxation, right? And then we're going to get to this whole thing of ventricular repolarization, where the ventricle recharges itself for another contraction. All right. And then you can see the time frame here involved, right? 0.1 to 0.2 seconds for atrial, 0.4 for the whole rest of the event. Anyway, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.3, 0.3. Anyway. All right, so in normal EKG, right, is where we're going to see a blip, atrial, relaxation, ventricular, repolarization, whatever. We see the PQRT, right? Fibrillation involves several types of irregular non-patterns. So when we get something like this, then that means we have completely uncoordinated movements when it comes to the heart and the electrical events that are going on with it. Okay, so if we think about there's no pattern anymore. That's just a messed up. That's atria and ventricles, and they're contracting all over the place and randomly and not waiting and whatever. Let's see. I bet none of these will work. Alright, so there's our echocardiogram. Hold on. So we'll see a normal EKG to a flat line, which you normally see in the movies. Alright, I think we've seen that a million times. So we see atrial, ventricular, repolarization. Atrial, ventricular, repolarization of the ventricle. So we should start to see something happen here. Everything looks the same so far. Yeah, that's not what you want to hear. Anyway, okay. So, I think we'll do that. We'll be done with that, but for the day. But so I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. So I do need to hear from you if you are feeling completely overwhelmed. Okay, because I will get on my computer at home and I can draw some stuff and we can do whatever or whatever. But I don't want you to be overwhelmed. But if you think you're gonna just fly in here, watch these videos real quick, and then take the quiz, I I would imagine that's probably not going to make you real happy. Um, so I would just say, um, let me know if you need something because we can take time to get this understood. I check my email. I will get your quiz scores in. How soon do we have another quiz coming up? Ooh, it's almost there. So probably by Friday we'll have another quiz. Yeah, by Friday for sure we'll have another quiz. So I'll try to have some sessions where we can do some question and answer. I'll try to get that Zoom thing set up and see if it's not so annoying. But anyway, um, listen, I hope you guys are staying healthy. I hope you're staying well. I hope that you're not going crazy being inside. This will be over one of these days. I am staying home a lot too. I'm not really hardly opening my practice much. Um, Part of it is I have a hard time getting cleaning supplies. Part of it is not a lot of people are coming in. But regardless, um, I think of you and I miss seeing you guys, and I'm hoping that this will pass quickly and that you can enjoy being at home with your family. But again, what we'll try to do is once this all passes, we'll try to get together and we'll have a cookout or something. I've got half a beef and half a hog in my freezer right now. And so we'll get together and we'll celebrate your senior year one way or another at some point. So regardless, hey, I miss seeing you guys. I hope you guys are doing well. I want you to finish well. I want you to finish strong. Okay? So again, if you have questions, email me, let me know, and we will go from there. All right? See you guys.